That's when Donovan dropped a name. "I'll assign one of my young guys to work with you. Bright, sharp, green as spring grass. But he's got bite. What's his name?" "Deputy Riley Moore. Just transferred in from Metro. He's been itching to take down some suits." Walter didn't love the idea. He wasn't a fan of rookies. They talked too fast, typed too slow, and got too emotional when things didn't go by the book. But he agreed. "Sort of." "Fine," he said. "Send your boy, but I don't babysit. You're both grown men. Try not to kill each other." The next morning, a black Dodge Charger pulled up in front of Walter's house. Out stepped Riley Moore, 27, close-cropped hair, clean-shaven, tactical boots, even though he was off-duty. He carried a slim laptop bag and walked like someone who always felt slightly out of place in suburbia. "Mr. Briggs?" he asked, offering a firm handshake. "Lieutenant Donovan briefed me. I'm here to assist." Walter eyed him. "You look like you just graduated." "I graduated top of my class, sir," Riley replied without missing a beat. "And I've been working digital fraud the last 2 years. You dig for paper trails. I dig for IP addresses." Walter grunted. "We'll see." Inside, Walter laid out his evidence on the dining table. HOA letters, budget breakdowns, maps, and a list of residents who'd been randomly fined. Riley opened his laptop and got to work, pulling tax records, IP pings, and online registrations. CityLink Build Co. was registered 3 months ago in Delaware. Classic shell company setup. No physical address, no listed employees. Payment. Routing goes through a third-party payment processor based in Nevada. Walter nodded. "Karen's laundering." "Possibly. But we need to connect her directly. Then let's squeeze the pipe until it leaks." They split duties. Walter would dig on the ground. More interviews, more observation, more old-fashioned snooping. Riley would go digital, financial trails, internal communication requests, and vendor networks. Over the next few days, the pieces started falling into place. Riley traced 3 payments from the HOA account to CityLink Build Co., totaling $74,000, using vague labels like consultation fees and environmental assessment. The funds were approved via a digital signature tied to Karen's HOA login, timestamped at 2:17 a.m. Walter spoke to 4 homeowners on the HOA's watch list, all of whom had refused to vote yes on the connectivity project. Each had received at least 3 citations within 2 weeks after, and then came the kicker. Riley found an email thread between Karen and a supposed consultant from CityLink. Subject line: "Push it through. They'll fold or pay." Body: "Once. The garage is cleared. We move phase 2 through the north lots. Don't worry about Briggs. He's old. If he fights it, we've got nuisance clauses." Walter's eyes burned as he read it. She just made this personal. Riley looked up. "This is enough to start an internal inquiry." Walter nodded, but not enough to make it public. "Then what now?" Walter leaned forward, voice steady. "Now, we bait the trap." Walter Briggs wasn't used to partners. He worked solo for most of his final years on the force, ever since his wife's condition had forced him to scale back. He didn't babysit. He didn't explain. He just did the work. But Deputy Riley Moore was growing on him. The kid had instincts. He didn't just follow orders. He followed threads. By the end of the week, Operation Maple Sting was in full swing. Donovan approved the informal task force under the radar, which gave Riley limited authority to assist. They had one goal: catch Karen Whitmore in the act of abusing her position for financial gain. But they needed solid evidence, not just suspicions, not even motive. They needed method and opportunity. Walter began walking the neighborhood again. But this time, he wasn't just chatting with neighbors about lawns and cats. He was gathering intel. He learned that HOA fines had tripled in the past year, but not for actual violations. One woman had been fined $50 for storing tools in plain sight, even though it was a small plastic rake on her porch. Another was charged $75 for unauthorized wind chimes. And guess what all of them had in common? They had refused to vote yes on the community connectivity project. Meanwhile, Riley got to work cracking HOA systems. Using a subpoena from Donovan, he obtained partial access to Maple Grove's digital HOA platform, emails, approvals, and digital meeting records. And, Inside that, he found gold. Karen's access credentials had been used to digitally approve contracts for CityLink BuildCo on days she wasn't even in town. One entry was time-stamped during a homeowner's funeral, where Karen was caught on camera speaking. At the podium. "Someone's ghost signing," Riley muttered. Walter leaned over his shoulder. "Or she's got someone on the inside." They flagged 3 HOA board members as questionable, all of whom had approved the community project funding without public disclosure. But it wasn't enough. Walter needed eyes inside the HOA office, so he got creative. Walter volunteered to help with the HOA's quarterly newsletter, a gig nobody wanted, and Karen assumed was harmless. "Just layout work," she said when he asked. Walter smiled politely. Happy to contribute. In reality, it gave him weekly access to the HOA office, where he could observe Karen, board members, and access to files. He wore a camera clipped to the inside of his shirt pocket, disguised as a pen. Riley gave him a digital recorder the size of a thumbnail. It slipped neatly into Walter's vintage keychain. The first week, nothing. Second week, jackpot. He walked in during what was clearly not a normal discussion. Karen was standing at the copier with a man in a suit Walter didn't recognize. The man was holding an envelope and whispering low. Walter casually stepped in to drop off a draft and pretended not to notice. But the camera caught everything. "You'll have it wired by Thursday," the man said. "Same route as Phase 1. No inspections, right?" Karen: "No one's checking. We're the oversight." That night, Walter handed over the footage to Riley. Riley's eyes widened. "This confirms unauthorized work, no city inspections, and corruption between HOA and private contractors." Walter nodded. "And I got the guy's license plate." Riley grinned. "You're good," Walter smirked. "Better than good, rookie." They ran the plate. The man was a contractor from a dissolved firm that had merged into CityLink BuildCo just months ago. In truth, it was a money-shuffling shell meant to hide identities. Donovan gave them a green light. They were now one good, recording away from getting a warrant. The next step? Get Karen to openly admit her role in the scheme. Walter suggested a town hall meeting trap. Get her talking in front of witnesses, bragging, overreaching. She won't be able to help herself, Riley agreed. "We'll wire the podium and place 2 plainclothes officers in the crowd. You'll be our bait." Walter didn't flinch. "I've walked into worse." The Maple Grove quarterly community meeting was always a dull affair. Usually 10 residents showed up, maybe 15 if someone promised cookies. It was Karen's favorite setting, small, scripted, and easy to control. But this time, Walter and Riley had other plans. They spread word quietly. Walter visited key neighbors, ones he'd interviewed during his investigation, and encouraged them to attend. "Come see what Karen's planning next," he said, tone casual. "Trust me, it'll be worth your time." Riley worked behind the scenes, coordinating with Lieutenant Donovan to wire the community center. 2 plainclothes officers, one posing as a homeowner, the other as a contractor, were seated strategically. A third camera was hidden inside a fake flower arrangement at the podium. Everything was ready. Karen strutted into the meeting hall in a light blue pantsuit, clipboard under her arm, and that signature tight smile that never reached her eyes. She glanced at the unexpected crowd, nearly 50 residents, and blinked. Walter, seated in the second row, caught that blink. Just a flicker. But it was enough. I knew something was off. Too late. "Good evening, neighbors," Karen chirped, stepping to the podium. "I'm so pleased to see so many of you here. Tonight, we'll be discussing Phase 2 of our connectivity project, an initiative to improve our community's accessibility and visual appeal." Walter watched Riley in the corner, tapping gently on his phone. "The signal that everything was recording," Karen continued. "As many of you know, this project is being funded responsibly through your HOA dues. We've partnered with a reputable firm, CityLink BuildCo, to ensure quality and efficiency." A murmur moved through the crowd. Mrs. Lopez raised her hand. "I looked them up. There's no website, no contact number." Karen waved it off. "They're a subcontracting arm. Perfectly normal. Everything is being handled internally." Another resident chimed in. "Then why hasn't the city issued any permits for this work?" Karen's smile tightened. There's no need for city. Permits when it's internal infrastructure improvement on HOA-managed property. Walter stood up. Funny. Because my garage is apparently in your way. And last time I checked, it's not HOA property. Karen's eyes narrowed. Mr. Briggs, with all due respect. No, Walter interrupted, stepping forward. With all due respect, Karen, you've been approving fake projects, ghost contractors, and funneling money through a shell company. The room went still. Karen's voice went ice cold. That's a serious accusation. Riley stepped forward. And we have serious evidence to support it. At that moment, Lieutenant Donovan entered the room in full uniform, flanked by 2 officers. Gasps echoed. Still fixing the same car? Riley asked. Walter wiped his hands on a rag. Young man, some things are worth taking your time with. Riley chuckled and handed him a six-pack. No citations for this beer, right? Only if you drink more. Then two and start talking about Bitcoin. They both laughed. As the sun dipped low and the cicadas started humming, Walter looked out at the neighborhood. Kids playing. Lawns half-mowed. Peace. He turned to Riley and raised his bottle. To the rookies that don't give up. Riley clinked his bottle back. To the old men who still give a damn. 6 months later, the only thing blooming faster than Walter Briggs' tomato vines was trust. It had taken time, patience, and more neighborhood meetings than he ever wanted to attend. But Maple Grove Preserve was finally starting to feel like a community again. Not a curated, micromanaged HOA catalog, but a real place, with real people and real progress. Karen Whitmore had been formally charged with 7 counts, including conspiracy to defraud, unauthorized use of community funds, and falsifying documents. Her trial was scheduled for later, in the year, and city investigators were still unraveling the network of shell companies she'd used. Several former HOA board members had quietly agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced penalties. Most of them moved out. No one threw them a going-away party. In their place, a new HOA structure had formed. Less of a board and more of a resident council, with rotating seats, transparent budgets, and a rule. If a policy can't be explained in 30 seconds, it doesn't belong in this neighborhood. Walter was asked to lead. He declined. Instead, he nominated Mrs. Lopez, sharp, assertive, and surprisingly fierce in meetings. I've already been the grumpy one yelling at everyone, he told her. Time for a new voice. But Walter didn't retreat into the shadows. Far from it. He remained the unofficial advisor, quietly reviewing documents, checking balance sheets, and mentoring the newly formed Community Oversight Group, which now met monthly in what used to be Karen's prized HOA resource room. Riley dubbed it the People's Room. The name stuck. Riley still visited every few weeks, sometimes in uniform, sometimes with beer, always with something to laugh about. The two had developed a rhythm, half banter, half wisdom swapping. Walter taught Riley about gut instinct. Riley taught Walter how to search public records in under 10 seconds flat. It worked. They still teased each other. I think, your Mustang's been almost done longer than I've been alive, Riley joked one evening. Walter sipped his iced tea. And you still park like someone's holding your steering wheel hostage. Then came the letter. An envelope, handwritten, addressed to Walter. Inside was a small folded note. You were right. I underestimated you. You're not just an old man. With a wrench, you're the reason I'll never run another HOA again. Walter showed it to Riley. The young deputy raised an eyebrow. You think she meant that as a compliment? Walter shrugged. I'll take it. He lit the note on fire over a tin coffee can and dropped the ashes in the wind. Late that summer, Maple Grove held its first real block party. No forms, no permits, no color-coded picnic blankets, just tables of food, kids racing on scooters, music playing from 3 different speakers at once, and Walter standing near the grill, tongs in one hand, root beer in the other. Someone handed him a microphone. He looked at it like it was a live grenade, but then Riley nudged him. Come on, you're basically HOA legend now. Walter sighed, took a breath, and tapped the mic. All right, he said. I'll keep this under 30 seconds, or your new president here will write me up. Laughter. He smiled slightly, then turned serious. You all know what happened. You lived through it. I didn't bring justice. You did. By caring, by speaking up, by showing up. He looked around the crowd. Families, kids, retired couples, young professionals. Don't forget that this is your neighborhood. And no one, no board, no title, no fake law, gets to tell you otherwise. Applause broke out. A few people even whistled. Walter handed the mic back and returned to his hot dogs. As the sun began to set, he sat beside Riley on the curb, watching the lights go up one by one along the street. Think they'll remember all this? Riley asked. Walter looked around. A group of teens was helping carry leftover chairs. A dad was showing his son how to hold a sparkler without burning his fingers. Mrs. Reynolds was dancing to an old disco song with her dog. He nodded. They won't forget. But more importantly, they won't let it happen again. Back in his garage that night, Walter dusted off a cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside, his old badge, a faded photo of him and his wife, a folded American flag from her funeral, and a small plaque, "To serve and protect." He placed it on his workbench. Next, to his wrench, his iced tea, and a little hand-drawn card from a neighbor's kid that said, "Thank you for saving our neighborhood, Mr. Walter." He sat down, took a breath, and smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, his home really felt like home. Life lesson from the HOA Sting. Sometimes the loudest power isn't the one that yells. It's the one that whispers through rules, fines, and fear. This story reminds us that justice doesn't always wear a badge. It sometimes wears old boots, lives in a quiet garage, and drinks iced tea while watching a neighborhood fall apart. Walter Briggs didn't fight because he was angry. He fought because something was wrong, and no one else would. With a calm mind and a relentless heart, he proved that no amount of policy or manipulation could stand against truth, patience, and integrity. And with Deputy Riley Moore by his side, we saw how experience and idealism could come together to protect what matters most: people, homes, and freedom from abuse. Never let silence grow in the cracks of control. Speak up, investigate, and always stand your ground. Love HOA takedowns, justice stories, and bold confrontations with corrupt power. Subscribe to Tales of HOA Tyranny, where every story is 100% original, written and produced just for you. Don't miss the next battle. Because next time, the war might start with a mailbox.